The Second World War was a time of intense conflict, where millions of soldiers and civilians were caught in a massive struggle between the Axis and Allied powers. One of the more fascinating aspects of this conflict, however, lies not on the battlefield, but behind the barbed wire of prisoner of war camps. When the war ended, Germany was left devastated, and millions of soldiers were captured and sent to American POW camps. These camps were scattered across the United States, holding prisoners from various nations. But the most interesting and often surprising stories come from the German prisoners of war. As these soldiers were held captive, they were subjected to an experience they could never have imagined: watching American Hollywood films. Now, you might think that this is just a small detail in the grand scheme of history, but for the German POWs, it was nothing short of a shock. These films, often filled with American ideals of freedom, democracy, and strength, stood in stark contrast to the world they had known under Nazi rule. To understand why this was such a profound experience, we need to go back to the culture and propaganda of Nazi Germany. Under Adolf Hitler, Germany was enveloped in a state of constant war rhetoric, where the ideals of the state were projected as superior to all others. German soldiers were indoctrinated with the idea that the country they served was at the center of a new world order. They were taught to see themselves as the master race, superior to all others, including Americans, who were viewed as weak and decadent. In contrast, Hollywood films represented the United States' values of individualism, personal freedom, and democracy. These were ideals that many Germans, especially the soldiers, had been taught to reject or view with disdain. They were raised to believe that the United States was the enemy, and yet, here they were, sitting in camps, watching films produced by the very country they had been told to hate. One can only imagine the confusion, the disbelief, and even the cognitive dissonance these soldiers must have experienced as they watched these films. For the first time, they saw Americans as people, not just enemies to be defeated. The Hollywood films, often showcasing the strength, courage, and heroism of ordinary people, portrayed a completely different image of the U.S. from what they had been led to believe. But how did these films make their way into the hands of German POWs in the first place? It was part of a strategy by the U.S. government to re-educate prisoners and promote Allied propaganda. The idea was that by showing these films, the American government could shift the mindset of the German soldiers, turning them away from the Nazi ideals they had been indoctrinated with. The introduction of these films into the camps was, therefore, more than just a way to entertain prisoners. It was a subtle form of psychological warfare. And as the prisoners watched, they couldn't help but be amazed by the glamour and the escapism of Hollywood. The films not only entertained, but also presented a version of reality that was entirely foreign to them. Some prisoners were so taken aback by the films that they would often discuss them with each other, sharing their thoughts and reactions. The American portrayal of life, relationships, and morality was something they had never seen before. These movies, which included everything from comedies and dramas to action-packed war films, became a tool for shaping perceptions. German soldiers, who once viewed Americans as unworthy of admiration, began to see them as people of strength, character, and even compassion. As we delve deeper into the experience of these POWs, we begin to see the layers of impact that Hollywood films had on them. From shock to admiration, the films slowly started to change their perceptions of the world they once knew. But of course, this was just the beginning. The real impact of these films would unfold over time, creating a deeper shift in the minds of the prisoners, and perhaps even in the wider perception of post-war Germany. Let's explore how these films impacted the German soldiers during their time in captivity, and how this cultural exchange between enemies turned into an unexpected experience of transformation and bewilderment. As the German POWs sat in their camps, they were subjected to an array of emotions as they watched the Hollywood films. At first, many of them could hardly believe what they were seeing. The American stars were larger-than-life figures, and their performances were far beyond anything they had ever seen in German cinema. The plotlines were often simple and clear, but they portrayed an idealistic world where good triumphed over evil, and the individual played a crucial role in shaping the future. For the German soldiers, this portrayal of life was jarring. In Nazi Germany, the collective good of a nation was paramount, and individualism was often suppressed. In contrast, American films celebrated the strength and determination of individuals, often against overwhelming odds. This was a radical departure from what the German POWs had been taught to believe. But it wasn't just the ideals of freedom and individualism that stood out. The Germans were also exposed to a different kind of humanity in these films. Characters in American films, particularly the war films, showed compassion, empathy, and a sense of justice. These were emotions that the German soldiers had been trained to repress under the brutal regime of the Nazis, where emotions like empathy were often seen as weaknesses. The experience of watching these films was transformative for many of the German POWs. It introduced them to a new way of thinking about the world and their place in it. Some began to question the propaganda they had been fed throughout their lives, and the realization that the world could be different from what they had been told was a powerful revelation. As the war came to an end, the German POWs returned to their homeland, but their experiences in the American camps stayed with them. Many of them found it difficult to reconcile the image of America they had seen in the films with the reality of the post-war world. The U.S. had defeated Germany, and yet the Americans they had seen on the screen were not the faceless enemies they had been led to believe. Instead, they were people with their own struggles, dreams, and complexities. In the years following their release, many former POWs shared their stories of watching Hollywood films in captivity. Some even began to view America and its culture in a more positive light, recognizing the humanity in their former enemies. The films had not only entertained them, but had opened their eyes to a new world, one that was far different from the one they had known. The legacy of Hollywood films in American POW camps is a fascinating chapter in history. It shows how culture, even in times of war, can be a powerful force for change. For the German POWs, it was a surprising and eye-opening experience, one that challenged their beliefs, softened their views, and perhaps even helped pave the way for reconciliation in the years to come. This cultural exchange, born from an unexpected place, had a lasting impact on the minds of the soldiers who were once the enemies of the United States. They walked away from the experience with a new understanding of the world, and perhaps even a new respect for the people they had once been taught to hate. In the end, the American films that were shown in POW camps served a purpose far beyond simple entertainment. They were a tool for re-education, a way to break down the walls of hatred and misunderstanding. And while the effects of these films may not have been immediate, they were certainly profound in the long run. For the German POWs, watching Hollywood films was an experience they would never forget, an experience that left them not only surprised, but deeply moved by the power of film to change hearts and minds.